I am Sam Young, Managing Director of Plan Giving and Strategic Advisor at Compassion and Choices. Hello and welcome to our exclusive Legacy webinar, where we will cover various topics surrounding effective end-of-life planning. Compassion and Choices exists thanks to supporters like you. We improve care, expand options, and empower everyone to chart their own end-of-life journey. Today, we are privileged to have Kimberley Pittman-Schulz join us. Kimberly's work has touched the lives of many, offering solace and guidance to those navigating the challenging path of grief. She is also the former CNC Plan Giving Advisor and a Legacy Circle member through her Plan Gift. Our esteemed guest brings a unique approach to grief management. Her clients describe her as a gifted gift mentor and trusted advisor, highlighting her emphasis on tapping into inner joy and connection to the natural world as tools for transcending grief and living forward. Kimberley created the Grief Releasing Pathways approach and a workshop series called the Joy Experiment, An award-winning poet and author, her book, Grieving Us, A Field Guide for Living with Loss Without Losing Yourself, was a #1 new release on Amazon upon publication in 2021. Her journey with loss began as a toddler, surviving a house fire that took her two sisters sleeping in the same room. Since then, she's touched lives worldwide through her writing and coaching. With great pleasure, I introduce Kimberley, a dear friend and colleague who has supported me during my personal journey with loss. Her insights and guidance have been invaluable, and I'm confident she will bring the same level of care and expertise to our webinar today. So now I turn it over to Kimberley, and I thank her for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thank you so very much. And thank you to the team at Compassion and Choices. And I want to also say thank you to the many volunteers and the supporters who make the very special work that Compassion and Choices does possible. The organization is really only able to help people transform their lives and create a transformative journey toward the end of life because we have so many people around the country that give back. So thank you everyone for being here. Now, some of you may know me. Maybe you've worked with me in the past with Compassion and Choices. And to those of you, I want to say, welcome here. And thank you for being here again. Now, on the other hand, I think for most of you, you probably don't know me. We haven't crossed paths. And the good news is you're not alone. There are 8.1 billion people on this planet. And so most people don't know I exist. They'll never know me. And at the same time, I'll never know them. I don't know what their dreams are, what they do for a living, who they love, and what heartbreaks they carry with them. And that's why being here together in this virtual space, whether you're here right now during this live workshop, or whether you're listening to this later after the workshop, there is something remarkable about coming together. Out of 8.1 billion plus people on the planet, we're here together in this space. And what brings us together, that common thread that connects us, that weaves us together. And I'm sure if I could see all of you, that we're a highly diverse group of individuals. But this thread that guides us, brings us together, has brought us into this space is loss. So I want to thank you for being here. And I know in the immensity of so many people on the planet, it can feel easy to feel small. In fact, it makes me think of the great planetary scientist, Carl Sagan. Now, I don't know if you've been on the planet as long as I have, but if you have, you might remember Carl Sagan as the co-creator, narrator, the real energy behind the series that aired in PBS. I think it was probably back in the 80s, called Cosmos. It's since been redone, but the original was back in the 80s. And what people most remember about Carl Sagan is his almost childlike wonder with the immensity of the universe, not just the planets and our own galaxy, but as he said, millions upon billions of galaxies and this endless universe. And so we tend to remember him for that. In fact, he referred to our planet as just a blue dot because it's such a tiny thing in the immensity of the universe. And then, of course, we who live on the planet, oh my gosh, we're even tinier and tinier pieces of that universe. He referred to us as a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. Now, if you're someplace in the middle of a storm right now, you might not be feeling that sunbeam. But it really can feel that way, especially in the aftermath of loss. It can really feel like we are such a tiny, tiny thing. And that's why coming together in a space like this makes a lot of sense and can help us support each other. But I think people miss a lot and miss the important part about what made Carl Sagan so excited about the universe and about our place in the universe. And that is that we're miraculous. It's so easy to take life for granted, right? So easy to take life for granted until a life is ebbing away or is lost. But as tiny as we are, even though we might be motes of dust, in Carl Sagan's words, we are huge in the lives of the people who love us and whom we love. We are huge. And we don't want to underestimate that. And that's part of what makes loss so very, very difficult, is that not only are we huge in the lives of others, they're huge in our lives. So we might not always think this way about our lives because we think, oh, I am who I am, right? But who we each are, who we become, who we are over time and at any one moment is always shaped and guided and interconnected with all the people, and in some cases, maybe companion animals and others and other kinds of beings in our life who really play a role in our day-to-day life, in our emotions, in our mind, as a physical presence in our life. So I say that all just to remind us of our own miraculousness, just our very own miraculousness that we can take for granted. When I think about loss for myself, and as Sam alluded to, I've had quite a few, and I'm not going to go through all the journeys of loss. I've had some very major losses, sometimes involving traumatic circumstances, and I'm sure whoever you are listening and watching, you've had your journey with loss and grief and traumatic experiences. And that's why it's so painful. You know, if we just didn't love, if we could just stop loving, it would make this whole grief thing probably go away. But grief does serve a purpose. Grief actually is a process. It's not one thing, actually. You've probably already discovered that, right? That grief is many emotions. It's not just feeling that sense of loss and longing and yearning. It can be anger. It can be shame or regret. It can be despair. It can be that sense of meaninglessness or lost purpose, that aloneness. And, I'm thinking when I lost my mother, I can remember when I lost her. Actually, next month, it'll be, it's more than 20 years now since she passed, but I can remember coming out of the hospital, and it was the absolute most beautiful, beautiful day. It was sunny. I mean, just an incredibly beautiful June day. She was living in Pennsylvania. And I remember looking across the street and see people laughing. I remember seeing cars go by and people talking, and their hands were all animated talking. Um, I remember a certain ruby-throated hummingbird that was doing this pendulum dance that the male hummingbirds do when they're feeling amorous. And the world was going on, but it seemed to be going on without me. It was a very changed world. It looked like the same world that was there before I went into that hospital room and my mother was with me, versus coming out of there. It looked familiar, but it was a foreign land. Because I realized when you lose a mother, what does it mean to be a daughter? If you lose a partner or a spouse, what does it mean to be a partner, a wife, a husband? What does it mean? And then, of course, if you're a mother, my mother lost 2 children. If you're a mother who loses a child, what does that mean? And so grief, loss, they kind of knock us really completely off tilt. Now, I've had people say to me as I work with people, when I worked in philanthropy as a plan giving advisor for Compassion and Choices, and I've held leadership roles in charitable gift planning and charitable estate planning roles with others over the years. But when I've worked with people in philanthropy and now in my work as a mentor, advisor, coach, and supporter for people trying to rebuild their lives after loss, one of the things I hear most often is, how long does it take to go through grief to get to joy? That's something that maybe is on your mind right now. How long do I have to be in this grief thing before I can experience joy or well-being or delight? before I can laugh again without catching myself and feeling guilty for laughing? Well, my answer is that joy is not a destination. Joy is actually a dimension. It's not like to get to New York from the West Coast where I live. You have to go through the Midwest, right? It's not that at all. It's not a destination. So I want to give you a little more information about that, a little bit more, a few more ideas about how you might tap into that. And there's two ways we're going to do it. We're going to talk today about noticing joy in grief. We're going to talk about that. And there's a variety of ways to do it. We'll talk about two ways and one in particular. But what I want to do right now is what I'd love for you to do, wherever you are, in whatever room you're at, to just look around, or if you're outside, if you're in a place where it's a beautiful May day where you're at, I want you to just take a moment and maybe even put your hand on your heart. I want you to actually feel the beating of your own heart. I want you to just look around the room and just see what's there, or look around whatever space you're in and just notice what's there. And just feel your heart beating. Mine's beating a little bit faster right now, I think, because I'm talking with all of you, but just feel that sense of yourself in this space, wherever that is. And now I want you to say, I'm here. I'm here. To remind yourself that you are here. And while it may be hard to envision moving forward with your life without the physical presence of that one you love, or maybe you're in the process of losing and saying goodbye to someone who's very dear to you, your life still matters. You still have your own journey to continue on, and you bring into this world something that only you can give. You know, I think of that scene in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy is running through the field of poppies, and you look at that field of poppies and they all look the same, but they're not. Each of those poppies grew up, blossomed, they go back into the earth. More poppies will come up, but it won't be the same poppy. So it's not fluff. It's not poetic to say that we are, in a sense, each special snowflakes. We are each unique, and we're needed here in this moment, in this space, in this time. And what we often take for granted is the individual moment. And that's why this talk is talking about noticing moments. And you can think, what does that really mean? Well, you know, in any life, if you think about your own life, there are really very few moments out of your life that you can truly remember. We tend to remember the very highest moments in our life, and we tend to remember the very lowest moments in our life. Sort of the peaks and the valleys, right? But most of our lives are really not made out of peaks and valleys. Our so-called ordinary life, which is really miraculous. Remember, the rest of the universe is lifeless. All that life is just right here, and you're part of it. So when you think about all those moments in your life, we do tend to rush through them to get from thing to thing to thing. The moment is always changing. Right now is a moment, and now, and now. And if you think about all the moments we've lived through and how few we can really bring back into our memory, it really tells you that there's so much more to discover in the very ordinary aspects of every single day. So one of the pathways that I've found really, really helpful for working through grief and trying to break through elements of grief is to focus on noticing moments. Is to focus on noticing moments that feel good. Now, initially, you may be saying to yourself, and we're going to talk about joy and what joy actually is, but you may be saying, well, Kimberly, I don't think joy is possible anymore. Without my beloved, I just don't think I can ever be joyful again. Well, for now, you might need to focus on delight. Could you feel delight again? Could you feel happiness? Could you feel just simply peace or calm? Because I know when we're grieving, our minds are kind of going all over the place. And in fact, grief itself, which we tend to think of as an emotion, it is, again, many emotions, a kaleidoscope of emotions. But most often, it starts up here. It starts in our thoughts. Something out in the world around us kindles a thought. So it may be you're driving down the road and a song comes on the radio, and suddenly your mind just go back to a time when you were with the one you love. And that's when you can feel, on one hand, gratitude and joy for the experience you had with that person. And you can also feel this deep sorrow and sense of loss, right? When I was talking with participants in my workshop recently, the Joy Experiment, everybody had experiences with being in the car being so tough because you're there, you're all alone. Whether or not you've got that radio on, it's a great place for the mind to suddenly get active with all kinds of emotions and thoughts and memories to kind of bleed in out of nowhere. So the idea behind noticing moments is to be able to take the reins a little bit of grief by being able to lean more into our moments, not only when we're grieving, but to start doing it when we're not in the griefiest places, right? We're not in the griefiest hole that we could be in. We want to be able to notice moments when we're not doing so bad and begin to develop a habit around it and learn how to lean into those moments so that we can begin to essentially retrain our minds about what we want. And the reason it's really important, and let me just step back here a little bit. Sometimes when I talk about joy and grief, people will say, well, I thought we were supposed to experience grief. Are you telling me to just skip through grief or bypass it or rush through it? Absolutely not. As I said, grief actually serves as a process to help us integrate that loss that we've experienced and all that goes with it into our lives so that we can continue to step forward in our own lives. And I'm not saying, moving on as if we're going to leave our loved one behind. We could do a whole other workshop on how to hold on to the one you love in new ways, even when they're not a physical presence anymore. But the idea is that you can take them with you in a way that's ultimately nurturing, and step forward into your life. And you can't avoid stepping forward. As far as we know, time only moves in one direction. So even if you don't want to move forward, you're going to be pulled forward just by the sheer passing of time in this world and this time and place. So the idea is if you stay too long, I mean, we want to honor and recognize the grief that we're experiencing, because grief actually is related to love, right? If we didn't love, grief would be kind of a cake dance. So it is a form of love. And so we do want to get curious about it. We want to experience, we want to acknowledge that something really did happen to us. And I know when I talk with clients, sometimes we try to talk about, gratitude plays a huge and important role. Again, a whole other topic for another day. And it's easy to look around the world and feel like, gosh, we have things so much better than someone else. But it doesn't take away from the fact that you really did lose something. You lost someone. You lost part of, your heart, part of your identity, part of what makes every day kind of worth getting out of the bed and living, right? It's, there was something there. And so the grief is an opportunity to hold that, to recognize it, to honor it. But we don't want to stay there any longer than we really need to for it to be supportive and to sustain us. So what we're really talking about here is how can we tap into that joy that is here, is there with you, but you maybe can't see it too well right now or feel it too well. How can we tap into that so that after we've held with and acknowledged and honored and felt our way through the dark place, we can say, okay, I acknowledge that. Time for you to move on. Now time for me to feel good. That's really what I'm saying we want to be able to do. Is you can't completely control waves of grief or what might kindle a reaction or a memory that's painful, but we can take the reins lightly in our hands, and we can guide things. We can shorten the time that we spend suffering. And again, the reason that this is so important is the longer that we stay in dark places, the more we're training our minds and our bodies, because we not only hold grief emotionally and through our thoughts and memories, but even in our body. Our heart space, our intestinal tract, our gut, they actually have neurons in them. I don't know if you knew that. So when you have a gut feeling or you have a heartfelt, or your heart is telling you to do something, you actually have neurons there. We have this vagus nerve that goes through our body and this entire nervous system. So when you experience both joys and losses, your body holds on to that. Your body remembers that, not only your brain and your mind, which is your thoughts and your sense of consciousness. So the more you stay in a really dark place, you're essentially teaching your mind that this is the new normal. And it gets harder and harder to kind of come back from that place. So that when I spent that 2 years plus in a really dark, deep grief, first of all, it's normal. It's absolutely normal. There's nothing wrong. I didn't grieve wrong. I just had a hard time tapping into that sense of inner peace. And do I wish it would have been shorter? Yeah, I do. Do I think that I could have experienced and held that grief and acknowledged it in a way that allowed me to get back into my life a little sooner? I think I could have if I had discovered the way forward. So, what I'm suggesting is some practices that will allow you to begin to break through grief a little bit, to kind of build on whatever things in your life aren't broken by your loss right now, so that you can begin to create openings for joy to emerge. And again, if you can't believe in joy quite yet, you could believe in delight or peace or calm. Let me take a little breath here, let you catch up with me a little bit. I want to just talk quickly about what is joy, because we all have our own definition. And even after I share my definition, you may still have your own. So I'm not telling you this is the only definition, but it's important for you to know what I'm speaking about. So when I talk about joy, I'm not necessarily saying you're going to feel like dancing on the roof 24/7 forever, and every moment's going to be, exuberant. Although I will say that dancing actually is one good way to cultivate a sense of joy. You're getting your body, mind, emotions, and spirit, however you conceive of that, to be activated. So, from that standpoint, it's not about always every minute, but the idea is to be able to have the ability to tap into your own true inner joy, your own sense of well being or contentness, or again, you have to define what that is for yourself. So, joy to me, what it's really about, it's different than happiness. So, happiness is like if you love riding on a roller coaster, which I do, you might not, but if you do, if you ride on a roller coaster, you get off, you're exuberant, you're laughing, you're giggling. Oh my gosh, that was so much fun. But then how long do you stay in that happy place? For a little while, right? And then what do you want? You want to go get back in line and ride the roller coaster again. We talk about something made us happy. So the idea with happiness is that generally it tends to come from outside of us and it tends to be more temporary. Whereas joy is really sort of inner driven. It's that sense of feeling like you belong to this moment, this time, this place, that your life matters, that you feel connected to the people and the world around you, the community around you. You have a sense of purpose. So it's not necessarily this idea of exuberance. I think sometimes people feel like joy can only happen if you're, succeed in climbing Mount Everest. Well, we have those peak experiences and they can help us cultivate that joy. But the idea is that there's joy even in the little day-to-day things. And there's a way to tap into that so that we can experience it. I'm going to tell you a very brief story. I'm just keeping a little eye on time so we have time for one practice and some questions. But let me tell you about this, because first of all, what I'm sharing with you is not just what has worked for me and what I've shared with others and has been helpful to others. There's also some science behind this. There's a lot of research still ongoing in what happens to the brain and the body when we're grieving or experiencing trauma, loss. Depression is different from grief. There's some similarities, but they're actually different. So there's still a lot of research going on, but there is some actual, legitimate science behind some of the practices and behind this idea of our brains and their neuroplasticity, their ability to sort of rewire things. So if we're kind of constantly staying in this downward mode, it gets harder and harder because this is what our brain's used to. And our brains are trying to protect us. Our bodies are trying to protect us. And at some point, these feelings and behaviors have actually served us. But when we're ready to get out of that darker place, to get out of our grief hole and start living more fully again, albeit a new, different version of ourselves, we do have to it's kind of like teaching our brain some new tricks. And the good news is no matter what age you are, we now know that that's entirely possible. So there's two forms of what I call noticing moments. And the first are just paying attention to moments as they come up in your day and leaning into them. Again, we have peak moments, we have valley moments, but what if we leaned into more and more of those moments that are just happening in our day as we move through our day? And the other thing we're going to look at, and I'll walk you through a practice around this, is how do we intentionally open up a moment and try to pay attention. These are in many ways a mindful type of practice, but you don't have to be a mindfulness expert or a meditative expert. If you've ever been at the dinner table and your mom or dad, or maybe you're in school and the teacher said, pay attention or be mindful of what you're doing, that's kind of what we're talking about. So it doesn't require any special background or practice to do, but it is about using your attention and your intention to pay attention to the moment. So I'll give you an example of how you might notice a moment as it just happened. For me, the reason I sort of stumbled into all this is when I was more than 2 years into a deep grief after two serious losses, including one that had traumatic elements to it. And I was thinking, I felt very hopeless. I didn't think I'd get my life back. I felt like I was showing up, but I was kind of going through the motions. I think you probably know what I mean. At that point, we were living alongside the East Fork of the Lewis River in Washington State. I now live in the Redwoods of California, but then we were fortunate to have a little A-frame right by the river. And every night, even though a lot of my routines were broken, I stopped doing so many things that were actually nurturing for me in the aftermath of these losses. But one thing I never stopped doing was before I would go to bed at night, I'd check all the doors, make sure all the doors were locked. Well, one night I was about to lock the last door, and I used to do, and I still do, a practice called saying good night to the night and saying good morning to the morning. And I hadn't been doing it. I kind of gave up. It seemed like, again, futile in the loss of people I cared about. But that night I decided to step out and say good night to the night. And once I was outside, I could hear the river in the distance. And while it was overcast, there was enough light that I was able to walk out to the river. And I stood at the river and I listened to the water flowing over the rocks. And as I listened, at one point, I actually thought I heard people talking upstream. And I can remember literally leaning out over the stream bed, trying to see, are there people up there? It's late. Are there people up there talking? And I realized, no, that was just the sound of the water braiding in on itself, moving over the rocks. I could take in the scent of the river, which had kind of a musty smell. And then the bank of the river was kind of muddy. So that had that earthy scent. And it was a misty night. So my arm, which was bare, had, I could feel the mist damp landing on it. And it was very chilly. And I stood there a little bit longer, just kind of listening to what I thought of as water music, just the sound of the river flowing along. And up in one of the trees, I could hear some birds roosting and kind of just settling into their nests. And as I started and I headed back and I was almost all the way back to the house, it suddenly dawned on me, oh my gosh, in those moments that I spent just standing by the river, doing nothing, not even trying to do anything, just being, I felt okay. I didn't feel griefy. I didn't feel sorrow. Life didn't seem impossible or frivolous. In fact, I felt pretty good. I felt kind of rejuvenated. I felt a little more alive. That's a big part of what joy is, simply feeling your own aliveness. And as I got in the house and I locked that door and I went upstairs, I thought, I'm going to start trying to do more of this, because while okay wasn't the same as exuberant or brimming with joy, anyone who's been in deep grief, and I think you know what I mean, okay feels really, really good. So the next morning I got up and I went out to the river, and let's just suffice it to say, in time, it didn't happen overnight. And that's the thing. We have to be patient. You don't get rich quick, and you don't necessarily heal your life quickly. But you take these tiny little steps, a few minutes here, a few minutes there. And the next thing you know, you're actually starting to feel better. And then now you can take on something else. I started writing again, and I started walking and hiking again, and I was getting energized in my career again. But it all started from that one moment of just simply noticing where I was and the world around me. So that's one thing I would suggest for you to do, is to, as you're going through that day, now it could be as simple as you're scrolling on your phone and up pops a cat video, or I'm sorry, I'm a sucker for cat videos, or I'm also a sucker for the videos of little kids dancing. They make me happy. They kind of lift my spirit. Is it exact joy in the moment? Maybe, maybe not, but it kind of opens me up. And then I pause to just savor it. So often we're busy moving on to the next thing, or we just keep scrolling. But to pause and to just mentally acknowledge, this makes me feel good. This makes me feel lighter. This makes me feel a tinge of happiness, maybe even a little joy. This makes me feel calm or peaceful. So part of it is just pausing, deepening that moment to notice. And it doesn't have to be some little clip on, TikTok or whatever. It could be you're at a restaurant and you have an exchange with the server and you feel seen. You feel absolutely seen. Or somebody asks you how you feel. Or maybe you're walking down the sidewalk and there's a little woolly bear caterpillar that you haven't seen for years. And instead of just thinking, a caterpillar, and you walk on by, instead you kind of crouch down. You take a look at it. Maybe you pet that little furry back and you just lean into that moment. You realize, oh my gosh, and that may not be it for you, right? You have to find your thing. But the idea is that there are pieces of our lives, even in great despair, even in really difficult moments, where as we, even just looking around, we can find something that brings us a little lift for whatever reason. Again, might not be that true inner joy, but it lifts our spirits a little bit. So I'm just saying, lean into that, feel it fully. Notice, use your senses to kind of notice what's happening. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it taste? Just try to savor that moment and mentally notice, this feels pretty good. I feel okay. That's telling your body, telling your brain, I want more of this. And that's going to open you up for more of that to emerge. So that's kind of waiting for the moments to happen, right? That's just sort of in the flow of life. You're just being open and paying attention to a moment that maybe just feels a tiny bit better than the one a little while ago, and lingering in that moment. The other way is what I would now call, I didn't have a name for it back when I was by the river, but I call it a tiny come back to your senses ritual, because it's about coming back to your senses. There's a little play on words. If anyone's ever said to you, oh, come back to your senses, it is about coming back to yourself. And that, again, is what we're talking about, that inner joy. It is that coming home to yourself and really feeling your own aliveness and sense of meaning and value in the world, and wanting to keep in this life and staying in this life. So if it's okay, it looks like we have sufficient time. If it's okay with all of you, what I would like to do, I'm going to just make sure there's no urgent questions before we do this. I'd like to walk you through what I call a tiny come back to your senses ritual that you can try anytime. And in fact, I have a self-care resource. I call it an app, but it's not like an app you download from an app store. It's really a link to a resource that will guide you through this process. So it's something that's available after this workshop. If you're interested, you can reach out and I can send you the link. But I'd like to walk you through the practice so you get a little bit of experience on how you can take a little tiny break, micro break in grief when you need to. But first, let me just check with the team here, Sam and Catalina, if there's any urgent questions I should try to respond to now, because I've been talking for a while. And I know people get tired of a talking head.
Kimberly, we have a couple. I think it'd be great to go through the exercise, and then after I'll just address a couple of questions with you.
All right, very good. Well, I appreciate your disembodied voice, Sam. Thank you so much. So what I'd like you to do, if you are game, is I'd like to, if you're sitting in a chair, if you're standing, if you're lying down, whatever posture you're in, I want you to just kind of get relaxed, wiggle a little bit, settle into, I'm going to say a chair, just assuming a chair. You adapt it for whatever your situation is. Maybe you're on the floor, so you're settling into the floor. But I want you to just settle down in your feel and actually feel your body, your back, your legs, your feet, supported by the chair or the floor, or maybe you're sitting out on grass. And just acknowledge that, because we take it for granted that we are supported. When we sit down, that chair is holding us. So just let yourself feel supported and held by whatever you're sitting on or in. And then what I'd like you to do is to close your eyes if that's comfortable. If closing your eyes is not comfortable, then just maybe, partially close them to a gaze where you're not really looking at anything. But whatever's comfortable, if you can close them, just close them and kind of go inside. And the first step of this practice is to simply acknowledge how you're feeling. I call it an emotional check-in, or check-in with your emotions. So take a minute right now with your eyes closed and just ask yourself, what am I feeling? What is my emotion right now? And use whatever language is natural for you. And the more specific, the better. Maybe you think, I'm feeling sad. Is it sad, or is it longing, or is it aloneness? Try to capture that emotion. Maybe you're feeling curious, or maybe you're feeling skeptical. What is this lady leading us through? So you've got your emotion. Okay. Step two now is we're going to check in with our bodies because, again, our bodies hold us and therefore they hold all of our experiences, joy and grief. So, what we're going to do is you can start at the head or the feet. I like to start at the feet. We're going to do a quick check in with the body. And we're going to start at the toes, work up through our legs to the crown of our head, and just notice what's there. You're not trying to change anything or judge anything. And the way I think of this when I do it is almost like a monkey climbing up a tree, noticing what's happening on each branches. So I'll just walk you through this fairly quickly, but I want you to pay attention right now to your toes. You notice anything there? And you may not notice anything. They may just be toes. They may feel a little chilly. They may feel a little tight. Just whatever you're feeling, it's just the isness of it, whatever it is. And now coming up into the ankles and the calves. What's happening in those calves? Mine feel flexed because I'm standing. We come up into the knees, thighs. Anything going on there? I'm going to move up into the hips, the abdomen, lower back. Feel. Anything feel tense? Anything feel light? Hip is just a hip today. Maybe one side feels different than the other, left versus right. Now, as we come up into the abdomen and the heart space, you can even, again, put your hands on your heart and feel that heart beating, reminding you that you are still here and it matters. Happening as you move out into your shoulders, arms, hands. Maybe wiggle your fingers. My fingers are chilly right now. My skin's dry. What about yours? And come up into your neck. Sometimes shoulders and neck can hold a lot of tension, right? And then up into your face. Is your face a little tensed or relaxed? Are you smiling? Not smiling? Your eyes feel. Your forehead. So that second step is just really identifying what's going on with the body and just really being in your own body. Now we're going to practice the heart of the practice. And what we're going to do is I'd like you to pick, there are actually more than five senses, by the way, but the main five senses we think about, right, are taste, touch, sight, hearing, smell. I'd like you to pick, most of us are visual. Some of us are more auditory, but I'd like you to pick a sense, ideally a sense that you tend to use less. Like we tend to heavily rely on vision. So I often will use my sense of hearing or my sense of smell. It could be your sense of touch. Whatever you would want to pick, I would just pick one sense. And what we're going to do is, again, with eyes closed, I want you to just lean into that sense and try to focus on whatever that sense brings into you. And I won't do it for the full 3 minutes just for the sake of time. Let's just do it for a minute or so. But the idea is to give you an example. Like well, right now I have earbuds in, so that affects how I'm hearing, okay? But a lot of times when I have my eyes closed and I am just listening, I can actually hear the breath coming in and out of my nostrils. I can feel the crinkling of my garments, my jacket or my shirt, because my chest is rising and falling with the breath. Might hear a bird or a dog in the distance, the hum of a refrigerator. So I'm going to just be quiet for not a few minutes, for say 30 seconds or so. And what I'd like you to do is to just lean into whatever sense you've picked and just pay attention to whatever you notice from that sense, okay? Are you ready to come back at this point? Did you get a little taste of that? If we were a smaller group and all in a room together, I'd love for us to share what we may have heard or not heard, what we may have experienced. But now that we've come out of that, there's one more step, and that is a very brief step, and that is to check in with how your emotions and your body feel now. How do you feel right now after just that little brief taste of listening or sensing, seeing, smelling, whatever you picked? And look for any shift in how you feel versus where we began. Sometimes when people do this for the very first time, they'll feel a noticeable shift. Sometimes it takes doing this practice several times before they start to feel any real shift. Sometimes the mind will start wondering, am I doing this right? Am I getting this wrong? Or maybe we're sitting and we feel a little uncomfortable. The mind loves to distract us. And what we simply want to do is bring that mind back to the practice, back to that sense. Now, as you practice this more, you get to a point where, like where I was on the river, I was listening to I was using all my senses, sense of smell and sight and sound and the feeling on my skin. Um, but the idea is to just go through that four-step practice to check in with the emotions, to see where you're at the beginning, check in with the body to see just what's going on with the body, and to actually be in the body and remind yourself, I'm still here. And then to hone in on that sense. Let it bring whatever you bring, because it's going to make your mind calm down for a bit. You're feeling more in your body. It's going to help you feel more synced and whole within yourself. And then when you're done, just that little check-in, and it may not be a difference or maybe a little shift. It could be something that's larger. And then here's how you use this practice. Right now, as I shared, when I was after 2 years of deep grief, all of my habits were broken except a few. One is, I will always have a cup of tea, no matter what. In the morning, I'm having a cup of tea. The universe could be collapsing and I would be having that cup of tea. So I started building a practice onto when I had a cup of tea, I would do this tiny come back to your senses ritual. I've had people add it on to after they're brushing their teeth or before they brush their teeth, because that's something they do. So initially you want to practice it in a habitual way, because again, we're trying to teach ourselves. Our brain has to learn, our body has to learn, our mind has to learn how to live without the one we love. And so any practice we do, whether it's this or anything else you're doing, it's going to take some repetition and sort of retraining for things to begin to open up and to create space. So you first want to build this practice into and on top of or around something that's already working for you. You then can add it into one of those broken places in your day. So if you've lost someone, but let's say, a lot of people who lose a partner or a spouse, and they were used to calling him at 5 o'clock on the way home from work, to see, does he need anything? Should I pick anything up? And now you don't do that. That's kind of a broken place in your day. And it looks like I'm having a problem with my camera. I'm not sure what happened there. So I am just going to, I don't know what happened, but that's the joy of technology. So I am going to try switching cameras and see if I can come back to you. And if I can't, I will just turn my camera off. My apologies. Yes, it looks like the technology is just not going to cooperate. There we are. I'm back, for good or for bad. So the idea is to then use this practice to help bridge a place where you might be feeling pulled down. And again, you want to sit with that, whatever those grief emotions may be, and be curious about them and honor them. But then when you feel like you've kind of had enough, that's when you can turn to this practice and you can kind of change the state of your mind and change the state of your body and implement this practice. So I'm going to stop being a talking head, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So Sam, I'm going to turn this back to you for now.
Okay. Thank you, Kimberly. I have 4 questions, so maybe you can briefly answer them as you can. I know it's sometimes hard when you don't have all the background, so I'm just going to go from top to bottom in no particular order. The first question we have is, if I give up my grief, I feel I'm giving up my loved one, betraying them. Normal? Question mark.
Normal, yes. the other so often we think we might be grieving wrong, or and that's part of how we beat up on ourselves in loss, is we expect so much and then we wonder if we're doing it correctly. But this idea of giving up your grief, grief is a form of love. So it's not like, so what you may be associating is, if I give up my grief, I'm giving up my love. That's not the case at all. What you and it's not really about giving up grief. It's about feeling it, allowing it into your life, but not allowing it to rule your life. So again, they'll have those grief waves that'll come out of no place. We can't always control it, but we don't have to be at the whim of grief. That's where these kinds of practices that kind of slow us down, that kind of because a lot of it starts up here with the thoughts. We start thinking about things, and that's where, it starts with the thoughts often, and then we get emotionally wrought, and then we can physically start to feel unwell. So the idea is to not feel that in order to continue your love with for someone, that you have to continue to grieve forever and every moment of every day. Grief will kind of take care of itself in that regard. There will be things, like I said, years later, you may be doing very well in your life, and you open a drawer and there's a lapel pin that they wore, and all of a sudden you're right back to that loss and that missing. So there are all kinds of strategies I could suggest, but to not let yourself feel joy again, I think that would be something that most of our loved ones would not want for us, or that we would want for ourselves. Again, as much as you would like the one you love to be on your life journey with you in a physical way, what's more helpful is to find out how to hold on to that loved one, so that that hole you feel from losing that person, actually becomes a place where you can hold them like a precious treasure as you step forward into your life. And grief isn't required to be able to continue to hold them with love and to honor them. And there's so much more I could say about this, but without knowing you and your specific situation, I just want to say, letting go of your grief, or it's not, releasing it or moving through it, is not saying you're done with your love or that relationship. That's going to continue. It's just saying, my life matters, and the best thing I can do is make the most of my heartbroken and still beautiful life, whatever that may mean. It's going to be different, but you can still feel that joy and sense of purpose again. I hope that helps.
I'm going to go, going to put a couple of questions together, and then I really have two more I'd like to get to as well. Both the two questions came up about anticipatory grief. I'm going to read the first one and then tie into the second one. Suggestions to dance with anticipatory grief, excuse me. I lost both parents in short order just a couple years ago, and it was really difficult. Now my beloved husband is becoming lost in Alzheimer's disease. Sometimes I feel like I won't be able to live through his death, but I'm open to learning alternatives. And then I just want to add, a question is that someone else said that I'm dealing with this, death of my spouse is not far off. I find myself looking for signs, and I hate myself for doing that. So perhaps you can just take this concept and share some thoughts, not knowing either person.
Yeah, I will share some thoughts. And first of all, my heart goes out to both of you. People often have this idea that if you have the anticipatory grief, that somehow when you're on the other side of the loss, it all gets better. And for some, it can. For most of us, it just becomes a different version of loss. It sometimes can help you prepare for the loss. But one of the challenges, whether you're a caregiver or just kind of going alongside someone as they're going through their end of life time, is we feel the sense of responsibility. I mean, in our heart of hearts, we'd love to have a wand and just fix it for them and take them out of their pain, or help them to live longer in a quality kind of way. So all those emotions are really, really normal. And I'll tell you, this is close to my heart. I am currently a caregiver, and as a wife, and have been for several years, and have been at the precipice of thinking this is it. And then, thank goodness we kind of come back from the precipice. There are times I've been worried, oh my gosh, is this it? Or should I do more? Why didn't I do this? How can I be patient? There are times we can get frustrated. And all I can say is, part of what complicates anticipatory grief is we often feel this sense of responsibility. Often we're trying to hold back how we feel because we don't want the person we're losing to feel stressed by our grief. But then that's an extra load we're putting on ourselves, right? And honestly, most of the time, the people who really know us and love us can kind of anticipate what we're feeling, whether we're showing it or not. So as much as we might think we're hiding something from them, we usually aren't. And we do have this tendency to feel guilty about, how long a process may be taking, or, our own lives kind of get put on hold in many ways, or get very, very altered. And, we want to be able to live our lives too. And then we feel guilty for thinking of ourselves. But the truth is, and I'm certainly don't do this perfectly. That's why I don't do a bunch of programs on how to be the perfect caregiver, because it's very hard to get that balance between caring for yourself and caring for someone else, dealing with your grief over the impending loss of someone you deeply love and you do not want them to go away, and all the practicalities that you have to do, because you still have to cook, clean, wash. You might be doing very intimate caregiving for the person that you're with. So I throw these things out to say that, and that when you get sort of on the other side of the loss, what will often come up that you can begin to anticipate now is feelings of guilt or shame. I should have, I wish I had, why didn't I? You'll look back, and instead of remembering all the moments that you were tender and loving and exhausted and overworked and unwell yourself, you'll find those one or two moments where you lost your cool, or you felt frustrated, or you just weren't up to it. And all I can say is what I used to say when I had a team that I led, and that is, we always want to do our best, but we need to remember that our best changes from day to day and from moment to moment. So if you're having a beautiful day and the sky's blue and your favorite team won and everything's going great, that's one kind of best. But if you're watching someone die, and it's hard to be a witness to watching someone's life ebb away, and you're trying to hold it all together, all the practical stuff that goes into life, as well as all the emotional stuff, your best is going to be someplace really different. And even in that moment where you might judge yourself about what you said or how you said it, honestly, that probably was the best you could do in that moment, because you're just so overwhelmed by the situation. And I could give you the same advice that you've already heard from 492,000 people, which is carve out time for self-care. It's incredibly hard to do. But that's where this kind of a practice can actually be super useful, because it only takes 3 to 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes. I mean, I've had people do it in the bathroom. No kidding. It's like, okay, I'm going to take a break now, kind of get my, just kind of bring myself back into a calmer place. So I don't know if that helps at all, but the more you can release blaming yourself or taking responsibility for someone else, responsibility that's beyond you, because what that's really about is we want to be able to control a situation that's uncontrolled. I don't mean control in the negative way. We want to make it better, but we don't actually have that control. And so what the mind starts to do is give us all kinds of reasons why we should have controlled something. It tries to tell us we have abilities that we don't really have. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Kimberly, we're getting to the end of our time. I'm gonna kind of take 3 questions and put them in and just
Okay.
let you frame sort of your closing thoughts.
Okay.
So the first question is, how do you not forget your lost loved ones if you are moving on from grief? Is grief and missing someone the same? And can grief be a gift? And those are 3 questions together.
Okay. Could you say those three again one more time,
Yes.
Sam?
How do you not forget your lost loved one if you are moving on from grief? The second one was, is grief and missing someone the same? And can grief be a gift?
Okay. Fantastic questions, all three. First, let me kind of start backwards. Is grief a gift? I don't know if I would call it a gift, but it also isn't a curse. A lot of times it can feel like a curse. Grief and the grieving process, it is a process. The idea is we're feeling these emotions because we love someone. In some cases, it could be a companion animal who's just been an enormous part of our life. So it's not necessarily a gift, although what I can tell you that surprises people when they're in grief and they're trying to rebuild their life, they're trying to figure out, who am I now without this person? What's possible for me? Is sometimes we discover whole new aspects of ourselves we never saw. We find new interests, we try new things. In this workshop I just ran, the Joy Experiment, we had several people who were doing things they'd never done before, trying things they'd never tried. And at first there's that little guilt thing about, oh, wait a minute, how can I be feeling good when I've lost my beloved? But that's what we're meant to do. Our life journey isn't over. We're meant to keep going on the journey. So it's a gift in that sense, in that sometimes we really can grow. It's not the way we want to grow. No one says, give me a death so I can grow. None of us would say that. But there is an element of growth that's possible if you are open to that. Is missing somebody and grief the same? They're not the same, but that missing somebody, which we might call longing or yearning, that is part of the kaleidoscope that is grief. I mean, grief can show up as anger, it can show up as guilt, it can show up sometimes as joy, it can show up laughing at the right moments and the wrong moments. So that longing, when I talk to people, what's the hardest part about losing someone you love? The two things that come up are, I just miss them so much. It's that longing. And that's why learning how to hold on to them in a new way as you step forward can really help. And the other piece is, I just feel so lost. I don't know who I am in the aftermath of this. And then the first question was about, remind me of that very first question, Sam. I'm sorry.
Sorry, let me go back. I apologize.
No worry. Oh, I apologize too. I thought I had all three set in stone in my
grief
brain.
and missing someone be the same?
Oh,
We did talk about that. Yeah, I
Oh,
just responded to that one. It's the very first one in the series.
You already said the gift one. Sorry, I dismissed these.
well, let me just start something else to finish. Is grieving for a sudden loss different when you are with your loved one?
Okay. When you're with your loved one.
And we have about
Yeah. Yeah. And I just remember what the first question was, if I could answer that one really quickly. This idea, well, it's not that I can ever, you all have the answers. I can offer you some guidance, but that earlier question was, how do I not forget somebody as I move through and release my grief? It's very unusual that you'll actually forget them. What we worry about is forgetting the sound of their voice or what their hair smelled like. And if you're concerned that that will happen, most of the time it doesn't. Our memories will soften because we're adding new experiences on. But one of the ways you can address that is to take some time now to take things that will help you remember and hang on to them. And that could be a piece of clothing. It could be something that they really loved. It could be their favorite flower that you plant in their garden. It could be saving the last message they left on your iPhone so that you could hear their voice. So there are some strategies I can't go into now that can help you hold on. Usually you might find the memories soften, but usually you're going to still remember them because they're such a part of your life and who you are and your life, your journey. You're building your future on what came before, and that includes them.
Kimberly, thank you so much. I know there's so many questions, and what I'd like to say is that this is a journey and there are a lot of questions, and sometimes it's not exactly what people are looking for, but what we're trying to do is to not only focus on planning end of life, but we're also for the people who are still here. And that's why we bring Kimberly. And what I really urge you to do is to reach out to me if I can be helpful through Compassion and Choices. We have so many resources, a consultation line, and all kinds of tools. And reach out to Kimberly as well. She has so many resources that you may continue to work with. So what I want to say, we welcome your feedback. We welcome you continuing the conversation with me for planned giving. Financial and estate planning is part of your end-of-life plan, and it's informational and educational. We are just looking to help and assist you find what's best for you. And what Kimberly is also trying to do is to balance that. And what I see is the full spectrum is to also address the feelings that we have for the people that are here. So I want to say grateful thanks to Kimberly, to our Compassion and Choices team, Christina and Catalina, who helped make this possible. And I'll let Kimberly just have the last word. This will be recorded and sent out, and we will let you know of our next program. Thank you to you, Kimberly.
Yes, thank you, Sam. I know everyone's ready to run off to whatever's next in your day. I just want to say thank you for being here. It is my sincere hope that you take something away, whether it's an idea or one of the practices, and that you find support, something that can really support you on your lost journey. If you're interested in getting my Tiny Come Back to Your Senses ritual self-care app, my email was on that last slide. You'll be receiving information from the wonderful people at Compassion and Choices. And thank you so much, everyone there, Sam, the entire team, and again, so many wonderful donors and volunteers who make this work possible so that we can change not only our lives, but the lives of people well beyond. We can change the lives of people that we can't even imagine right now through the work that's being done here. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone, and please join us again.